The choices that were given in this quiz were very dichotomous in the sense that it's as if you're given two choices, but it's almost as if instead of picking the two choices, you want to write a more nuanced opinion of what you actually believe.
Hi guys, and welcome to The Conversation, the Crossing Party Lines or CPL podcast. CPL is a non-profit that facilitates weekly discussions where people with differing political views have the opportunity to share their thoughts and feelings about politics, society, and everything in between, to listen to what others think and feel so that we can really understand why Americans believe what they believe. I'm your host and moderator for CPL, Marcus Johnson, and today we're talking all about shades of red and blue. What's your political colour? All right, joining me for today's episode, we have Sam. Sam, thank you so much for taking some time to hang out. Do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Of course. My name is Sam. I work as a technology product owner, and I'm based out of Austin, Texas. In my free time, I like to hike, work out at Orange Theory, spend some time with friends, travel, and read about American history and politics. So
Orange Theory, one of my best friends does this. It sounds terrifying. Why would you put yourself through this?
Well, it's only terrifying if you're lazy or if you haven't worked out in a while. Yeah, then it's terrifying. I started doing it after I moved to Austin, Texas, which was about 5 or 6 months ago, because during the pandemic, I was like 180 pounds and I'm a 5'7" guy. And I was like, dude, I got to work out and lose weight. And so I basically went to Orange Theory, went on a diet and lost like 10 pounds.
What made you choose Orange Theory?
Well, it was the gym that was closest to where I was. I mean, I looked up quite a few other gyms, and then it was between Orange Theory and CrossFit. And, CrossFit seems like a good gym too, but I just looked at Orange Theory and, it's got a good chunk of cardio and weightlifting. So that's why I chose it.
Don't you have to be there at like 4 a.m. or something horrendous? Maybe that's just him.
No, that sounds just like your friend.
Okay.
There's multiple time slots that you can choose throughout the day. Tomorrow, I'm going tomorrow at 6:45. So
PM?
6
PM?
PM, not in the morning.
Okay, so it's just my friend who's a maniac. Very good, very good. Well, thanks for joining the show and talking to us all about our topic today, which is talking about our political colour. And it's always seemed a little reductive to me to try and squeeze 300 million Americans, 240 million who are eligible to vote, into two camps, red or blue, given the enormous range of colours on the political spectrum. Even if you just take the two major parties, you can find different shades within each party. And this is a topic we talked about on one of our Crossing Party Lines meetups that we have every week, where we have a bunch of people get together and discuss what they felt their political colours were. Was it a lighter shade of red, some kind of a variant of blue? And how do you get to these different shades? How do you know where you fall on the political spectrum? Well, Pew Research Center recently released a report titled Beyond Red versus Blue, the political typography that offers a fresh look into American politics, finding that it's about more than just Democratic and Republican parties. Their survey of over 10,000 people yielded 9 distinct political subgroups. I'll quickly read them all out, but to give you 2 examples in a bit more detail, they had the progressive left. That was one of the 9. These folks are highly politically engaged. They care deeply about racial justice and the environment. Another subgroup was the committed conservatives. They're pro-business, small government. And then the other ones they identified were the establishment liberals, Democratic mainstays, outsider left, stressed sideliners, faith and flag conservatives, populist right, and the ambivalent right. So that was the report that identified these 9 distinct political subgroups. But there was also a quiz that you could take. And we're going to put a link to the quiz in the show notes in the description box. So you'll be able to find it there and take the quiz yourself if you like. And Sam, you took the quiz, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, so I guess before we figure out where you landed, what were your thoughts on the quiz?
I would say that I would have a couple thoughts that come straight away to my mind. One of which is that I think the questions are important. I think that they're very legitimate questions, but the choices that were given in this quiz were very dichotomous in the sense that it's as if you're given two choices, but it's almost as if instead of picking the two choices, you want to write a more nuanced opinion of what you actually believe. And there was even one question where I was given two choices, and I actually agreed strongly with both. But the question is framed in a way where it makes it seem like you have to choose one or the other.
So someone recently asked me my love language. I must have done this test a million times because I always forget it. But I did the test recently again. And in the test, you're presented with about 30 or so questions, and you pick between two different options. And this political subgroup quiz from Pew Research does the same pretty much. And a couple of examples of some questions from the quiz from Pew Research would be, if you had to choose, would you rather have a smaller government providing fewer services or a bigger government providing more services? Another example of a question would be, which of the following statements comes closest to your view? Business corporations make too much profit, or most corporations make a fair and reasonable amount of profit. And so, Sam, how did you feel about the number of options that you were presented with in each question?
Honestly, Marcus, I think just some of these questions, while they certainly are important, they're not questions that can simply be answered by giving the person taking the test a list of options to choose from. They are things that you'd have to really have a conversation to hash out all of the different nuances and details associated with it. It requires a Joe Rogan podcast, basically.
Right.
3 hours.
Hours and hours of conversations. And maybe this quiz wasn't nearly nuanced enough to try to capture the varied opinions of the hundreds of millions of people in this country who vote. So all that to say, I think it was 16 questions you go through, and then it tells you at the end which political subgroup you're most likely to belong to. Sam, how accurate do you think it was for you after having finished the quiz?
I would say that the label they assigned was, to me, surprising, although the description of what that label was actually fairly accurate. Not 100% accurate, but I would say like 95% accurate.
Interesting. And where did you land, if you don't mind me asking?
So I landed as a committed conservative, but I kind of took issue with that because I would say that I agreed with somewhat of the description that was presented with regards to that, but I would still consider my politics to be very centrist, very moderate.
Okay, so surprising that you landed there. But when you read the description, you found that you were more aligned with it than you expected?
More aligned with it than I expected, yeah. I mean, generally, committed conservatives, or at least according to the Pew Research Center, people who are business conservatives, they support free market capitalism, that are in favor of lower taxes, but they take moderate stances on issues like immigration, racial and ethnic equality, maybe some criminal justice reform issues, I believe. The only part that I really disagreed with was this idea of support for Donald Trump. And I'm not someone who voted for Donald Trump in either 2016 nor 2020, and I don't think the Republican Party actually should even have him as any candidate for any future office ever again. But again, with regards to those issues about being a business conservative and supporting more centrist stances on immigration and racial equality, I'd say that's accurate.
Okay, so when you looked at the list of different subgroups, was there one you would have picked before you did the quiz?
Oh, Jesus. I don't think so. I mean, there were just so many options, and I kind of don't understand why there are so many of these labels. It's one of those things, Marcus, where I read through the different labels, and I could maybe pick and choose like different features of each one, and then just create my own little political label. But yeah, there's not one that I neatly fit into, I'm going to be honest with you, man.
Okay, so you probably straddled a couple of these. So just to give the listeners a sense of where the general public landed across the different categories, if you think of a spectrum, and because we read left to right, let's go from left to right. Dark blue all the way on the left, dark red all the way on the right, Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right, Liberals left, Conservatives right. And so you had the first group of people on the left, progressive left, all the way to the left, 6% of the general public identified as them after the quiz, progressive left. Then it was the establishment Liberals, 13%. The Democratic mainstays, 16%. That was the largest grouping on the left, and also largest grouping overall, 16% Democratic mainstays. Then the outsider left, 10%. They were more of the center-left folks. So that's the blue side. You then had the stressed sideliners, 15%. So the undecideds, if you will, they were bang in the middle. That's the second largest group of any of these. Then on the right, in the reds, you had the light red, the ambivalent right, 12%, slightly darker red, populist right, 11%, even darker still, committed conservatives, 7%, and then you had the faith and flag conservatives, 10%. All the way to the right. The biggest group of Republicans was the ambivalent right, the center right, with 12%. So only just, but that was the biggest group that was some shade of red. So how do you feel after taking the quiz, Sam? You kind of have an idea of what group you thought you identified with, and then take the quiz and it tells you actually you're a little bit different. What were some of the feelings you had post-quiz?
I think my politics, even though I prefer to describe myself, Marcus, as very moderate/centrist, I think if I'm being honest with myself, my politics are slightly right of center, but I don't think they're so far right that I would describe myself as conservative in any way. But more importantly, after the quiz, forgetting about what result I got, I think some of these questions, as I've said before, are just way too dichotomous. I mean, they're too much about trying to pigeonhole you into a set of narrow choices when really a lot of the issues and opinions that you can express on these things are very nuanced and very complicated. And it's not so easy to just simply say, well, here's what you believe, either this or this. So overall, I think, the quiz can call me a committed conservative, but I'm going to stick with my label as a moderate.
Do these labels help at all? Why do you feel it's important to have a label for yourself?
Well, I think a label is not required, but I think it's preferred for a lot of people just to form a political identity of their own. I think that, first of all, the labels that are offered in this Pew Research Center quiz are not necessary. We do not need more labels. I think the number of political labels that we have right now, at least in American politics, are enough. We have liberal, we've got conservative, we've got moderate, we've got some libertarians, we've got socialists. I mean, we already have enough political labels as it is. I don't think we need any more. And I think it's fine for people to identify with whatever label they want, but as long as you're willing to have an in-depth conversation on the issue and talk about the issue specifically. And, we can be whatever labels we want to be, but I think in my experience, I've talked to liberal friends of mine, and I've actually convinced them that they are actually more conservative on some issues than maybe they originally thought. And then I've talked to some conservative friends of mine who realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm not as conservative as I thought. I'm actually more liberal.
Sam, when you talk to people about politics, do you find that they offer up a label up front? Or is it something that you find out kind of during the conversation?
I would say labels are not usually offered up front. I'll give you one good example that'll better illustrate the point. There's a friend of mine a few weeks ago. He and I were having a conversation about Glenn Youngkin's victory in Virginia in 2021. And he was like, can you explain to me what was going on? And I said, okay, well, I think education had something to do with it. It seems like a lot of parents were unhappy that lockdowns were still happening in the schools. And, there was this controversy about critical race theory. And then we had a whole conversation about, what is critical race theory, whether it's good, whether it's bad, what about the unions? And I don't think for the first 20, 30 minutes of that conversation, we even mentioned what our political labels were. Mm-hmm. I think we were just presenting different perspectives on the issue and trying to better understand, what the right solution to, whatever problem it is we were talking about was.
So most of the time you get through a conversation and you're not sure how they identify whether that's party or whether that's a political subgroup.
I mean, usually even after only talking about one issue, we tend to assume, oh yeah, that person's very Republican or that person's very Democrat. But in reality, that's actually not a scientifically accurate way of thinking about things, because the only data point that you have is just one issue out of a bajillion that are out there.
So you mentioned that at least the group that the Pew Research quiz suggested that you was a committed conservative, and you said that there's some elements that you align with, others that you don't necessarily do. Taking those few elements that you do align with and taking the few that you maybe pulled from one of the other buckets and creating, let's call it the kind of the SAM category, your SAM political subgroup. Has that bucket changed over time? Have you slid up or down the scale as time has gone on?
I would say so. Well, I think it also depends on the time frame you're talking about, right?
Okay.
I've been into politics since I was 13, 2008, and my views are not at all the same as what they were in 2008. I've explored a lot of different perspectives. I entered college actually as a libertarian, and I was a Ron Paul supporter because it was 2012. I wouldn't say that I'm fully libertarian now, but I mean, I've definitely changed my mind on a lot of issues and have really exposed myself to differing philosophies. So what's in that bucket has definitely changed.
What's made you change your mind? I mean, I'm sure it's a whole bunch of things, but if you had to rank the kind of main things that have happened or conversations you've had or issues, like what has been the big things that have really kind of shifted your thinking or moved you along the scale somewhat?
I would say in 2008, I was a Democrat. I was only 13 years old and one of the most foolish kids you'll probably have ever met if you were to meet the 13-year-old version of me.
Sounds like every 13-year-old, don't worry.
That's
typical 13-year-old.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. No, so I was in 2008, after Barack Obama won the election, I kind of disconnected from politics because I got busy with school. But as I entered high school, I had two really bad public school teachers who were just some of the most incompetent people I've ever seen in any job occupation. And it wasn't just me who thought this, Marcus. This was like everybody in our class, and even the upperclassmen who had experienced these teachers in prior years, they agreed. And so I was like, why is it that if everybody agrees that these teachers suck, why are they still working in education, or why are they still working in our school? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, I found a video on YouTube of then Governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, railing against the teachers' unions and saying how bad the unions were. And I was like, wait a second, this guy is actually saying what I've been thinking, which is that teachers have tenure. Why do you have a job for life? There's virtually no other occupation that I can certainly think of where you have a guaranteed job for life. And I was like, wait a minute, he's Republican. So then that caused me to research a bunch of different issues and really re-examine the different sides. And I realized, you know what? I think I'm actually more conservative. 2012 comes along, and then I started reading about Ron Paul, got into libertarianism, read a little bit of his book, started reading some articles from the Mises Institute, named after Ludwig von Mises, started reading some studies from the Cato Institute. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm a libertarian. And I was a libertarian for basically most of college. And then after Donald Trump ran for president, I kind of realized, okay, well, wait a second. I don't think I'm a Trump supporter, but I think my previous views on some libertarian ideals may need to slightly change. And I then basically, in 2016, and I still voted for the Libertarian candidate for president as a protest vote because I thought the two candidates who were given really sucked, to be very blunt. And then I worked full time in New York City from 2016 to, the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And during that period of time, I got to be honest, I think I came very, very much to the center because I started to realize like there were definitely these problems in the Republican Party and the conservative libertarian movement that I started to see come to light. And I was like, with Donald Trump representing the face of that movement, I realized that's not where I really see myself. So I came to the center, but I didn't go left because I also thought there were some problems on the left with regards to not people who disagreed with Trump, not people who disliked him. That's totally fine. But people who had this radical hatred of him, and meaning that almost everything he did, they were just like, he could never do anything good.
And you're talking about the politicians, or you're talking about regular, ordinary Americans?
Both.
Okay. Was it one more so than the other that bothered you the most?
I think, to be honest, it was the politicians that definitely bothered me the most. But living in New York City, which is vehemently anti-Trump, I really could not stand how religiously. I mean, Trump supporters look at Trump, I think, oftentimes as if he's Jesus. Generally speaking, not everybody, of course, but and then New Yorkers look at him as Satan. And then I'm thinking to myself, this is like two angry parents who are going through a nasty divorce battle, and I'm the victim in the custody agreement. And I'm just like, I don't want nothing to do with either of you fools.
Right.
So I just stayed in the center, formed my own opinions, kind of kept politics on the down low in New York. And then the pandemic hit. That kind of changed my opinions on maybe some of the need for government intervention with regards to how we handle pandemics and implement social distancing measures. And I think at the end of the day, after like the last year or so, I kind of just stuck in the center and realized, you know what, I can be liberal on some things, I can be conservative on some things, but overall just be pragmatic about the issues. Yeah.
Is it fair to say then that it seems like a lot of your thinking around how you identify politically has been influenced by leaders of said parties, as opposed to maybe things that have happened in your life on a more kind of grassroots level, or conversations you've had with certain people that have really kind of changed your mind? Is that fair?
I would say that that's fair, but it is not to say that there have not been no events in my personal life that have changed my mind. In fact, I can even cite a personal event,
sure, please.
A couple of them. So when I was in high school in the summer of 2010, as well as the summer of 2011, I worked at 2 different internships at 2 different hotels. I have an uncle of mine who works in the hotel business, or used to work back then in the hotel business, and he arranged to have me work in one of the hotels in the summer of 2010 in New York City. Now, at the time, I was living in California, but my uncle lived in New York, and he arranged for me to work in this hotel. And I got to be exposed to how the housekeeping in a hotel works, how the accounting department works, and how the front desk works. And I did something very similar in the summer of 2011, which was the following summer, in the south of India in a town called Cochin, in another hotel, which was part of the same chain, but basically the same thing. And what it actually really taught me is that it really shows you what goes behind the scenes at a hotel, and understanding the fact that there's a lot of politics with regards to labor unions in these hotels, which really started to feed a lot of my already negative perception of unions with regards to the teachers' unions that I had because of those bad teachers I mentioned earlier, but also the labor unions in hotels. I mean, I saw management fighting, literally like having shouting matches in the back room with some of the workers. And I was taught to just be quiet. I didn't say anything. I just acted professionally. And those, I would say, were really, really interesting events that really shaped my politics as well. So, I would agree it's been mostly politicians. It's mostly been these big, large-scale macro events. But there have been micro events in my life that I'd say have also influenced me.
Okay. Any others that come to mind? Significant events which have kind of shaped your politics?
Yes. So in the summer after high school, so this is going back a few years, in the summer of 2009, this is the summer after my freshman year of high school, I went on a community service trip to the country of Nicaragua for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And we were I went with another group of high school students, and we worked on building a classroom and exploring the local Nicaraguan country. And, I won't go into too many details, but the main gist of it is, it reminded me how fortunate I was to be an American. And even growing up, Marcus, and I'm not saying this to brag, I'm just stating it to point of fact, I've been to 29 countries, roughly so, outside of the United States over the course of my lifetime. And there are beautiful things about these countries, beautiful cultures, beautiful people. But one of the things that I'm always happy for is at the end of the trip, when I come home to the airport and see an American flag, and I'm like, yes, I'm home. Because it gives you perspective on the fact that when you travel, you start to see what it's like to not live in America, and a lot of the things that we take for granted in this country. So many people in these third world nations, or even in some Western nations like France or Italy, they would love to come to America to have the opportunity to achieve their dreams. I mean, there's a lot of things that we take for granted here, and I think the way it's informed my politics is to say, look, we may have all these problems in our country, and we should focus on fixing them and improving our country where necessary, but we should not lose sight of the fact that this is still an exceptional country to live in. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that are great about this country. Let's acknowledge we've made progress on a number of things. And I would say that it's actually made me a much happier person, having that perspective and being willing to acknowledge, like, hey, we've got some problems, but we've also made some progress too.
Are there any examples that come to mind in terms of, something that you think people, say in other Western countries, might look to America and kind of wish they had back in their homeland?
Yes. You know what? I think that a lot of people, even basic things, here's something super basic, Marcus, is just having food in their grocery stores. I remember seeing this video on YouTube where a Venezuelan man, and even a Cuban man as well, visits America, walks into like one of the big grocery chains, doesn't really matter, and he just sees the grocery shelves are just stocked with food. And he just starts to cry because he's like, this is nothing like this happens in my country. They're empty most of the time because Nicolas Maduro and the Castros, Fidel Castro, I think he's gone now. But that said, communism and socialism really ruined their countries. And they look to America, and many of them, Venezuelan Americans and Cuban Americans who have settled here, really who have lived in under these harsh authoritarian regimes, look at America as the land of opportunity for climbing out of the poor class into the rich class. Mm-hmm. And this is, we have definitely, I think, some problems with people being able to move between classes in this country, and we can address those. But lots of people look at America as a way where you can just start over and climb your way up. There's opportunity here. And I think a lot of them wish that they had that as opposed to being stuck in permanent poverty in the way that tragically a lot of Cubans and Venezuelans and even some Indians, which is where my parents came from 40 years ago as immigrants from India. A lot of people are stuck in that situation. I think they wish that they'd have some of that spirit of American entrepreneurship in their country to alleviate a lot of that poverty.
So I'm going to circle back quickly to these groupings for one more question. After looking at these groupings from Pew Research, as I mentioned before, populist right, outside the left, democratic mainstays, etc., when you look at these groupings, does it change the way that you talk or think about American politics today? Because it's fair to say, right, that before doing this quiz, you hadn't seen any of these groupings before, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So yeah, after looking at some of these, has it changed the way you talk or think about American politics?
Not really. I'm going to be honest. I think I looked at the labels and the groupings. I was like, this is too complicated of a roadmap to really talk about politics on. I think the way that I still talk about it is just try to talk about specific issues, worry about labels second, and talk about different perspectives and see what we can agree upon and disagree upon.
Right. But it seems, though, that you were saying that at one point you kind of used your vote as a protest vote because you were quite disenfranchised, if that's fair to say, with both the major parties. And there's been talk about a third party for a long time. And there's a couple of recent Gallup polls showing 62% of Americans think Democrats and Republicans are doing such a poor job of representing their constituents that a third party is needed. That's up from 40% who thought so 20 years ago. So it went from 40% to 62% over those 2 decades. And then another one as well. This one is from 2019 poll, NBC Wall Street Journal, saying even if they're down on the independent candidate being presented to them, nearly 40% of Americans think a third political party is needed to fix the political system. Independents were most likely to have said the two-party system is broken and the third party is needed, 62%, but 37% of Democrats said the same and 31% of Republicans as well. When you look at these other categories and you think about your past experience and changing in thinking, do you land on the idea that a third party, at the very least, maybe a fourth and a fifth, is what's needed in terms of, legitimate contenders? Because there technically are multiple parties, but in terms of who's got the chance to actually run the country and be in office, it's really just two.
Marcus, I'd say that I have a few things to say about that. It's not going to be a super direct answer.
Please.
Number one, I'm open to the idea of third parties. As I said, I voted for the Libertarian candidate in 2016 and 2020 as well as a protest vote.
Okay.
I think, however, this leads me to my second point. I think that third parties, I look at more as a strategy for the short term, only in the event that the two parties are not properly or adequately addressing the concerns of the electorate. And so the way that I would explain it is actually, let's say that neither of the two parties are representing our interests. And let's say that in 2024, we got two presidential candidates that are running, one Democrat, one Republican, but voters once again are fed up with the two candidates. I would be open to a third party running, and not with the goal, though, of getting the third party to win. What I think could happen is if you have a Ross Perot candidate, not with his politics per se, but someone who could garner like 18% of the vote, I think, that he did in 1992.
Yeah, pretty much 18-19% of the popular vote. Yeah,
18-19%. Yeah. So the third party obviously is not going to win with 18 to 19% of the vote. One of the Democrats or Republicans would win. But once the election is over, my personal perspective is that both the DNC and the RNC, right after the election is over, or maybe a couple weeks, they're going to say, we got to point out the big elephant in the room in this election, which is that like 20% of the electorate went for a third-party candidate. And the Democrats, let's say the Democrats won in 2024, hypothetically speaking. Republicans are going to say, hey, you know something? We may not have been able to get those voters and we may have lost this election, but the fact that 20% didn't vote for us, they also said they didn't vote for the Democrats. So if we are going to win in 2028, maybe we can appeal to these voters. And if we can bring them into our party, we can kick the Democrats out of office in 2028. And the same thing, by the way, with the Democrats.
Right. But I see what you're saying. And he did get basically 80-90% of the popular vote, but he didn't win a single electoral college vote. So do you think that they would take those people as seriously, or that third party as seriously, knowing that actually he didn't steal away any electoral college votes, just popular votes?
Well, the goal wasn't to get him elected. It was to get the issues that Ross Perot was addressing addressed by the two parties. So Bill Clinton then started talking about trade. And as a matter of fact, Perot ran again in 1996, and the percentage of the popular vote that he got actually dropped. So a good chunk of those voters, maybe they didn't turn out to vote, or a good chunk of them actually went for Clinton or went for, I think it was Bob Dole who ran the second time. The point I'm making is, to use my example, which is that if the goal isn't to get the third party elected, it's to get the two parties to pay attention to the third party voter. And so, the Democrats would say, you know what, we got to take, even though we won the election, we got to go after these voters, because if the GOP goes after them, our president is a one-term president.
Mm-hmm. Sam, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, sir. Thank you so much for taking time to share some of your thoughts today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone listening. Of course, if you want to share your thoughts, feelings about politics, society, and everything in between, then head to crossingpartylines.com, sign up for a meeting, and then we will select a few folks from the meeting to be on the next show. Or feel free to just attend a Crossing Party Lines meetup and join the community. We'll see everyone soon on another episode of The Conversation, the Crossing Party Lines podcast. I was panicking so much. I was like, please don't crash, please don't crash, please don't crash. Just get through the last little bit here.